Welcome back, everyone, to the Hearth Guy's Tour Guide to Fodlan. Wait, what? What does that mean? Oh, I guess it's not Fodlan we're talking about today. We're looking outward to cover the vast lands of not Fodlan. From poor, worthless Almyra to the vast kingdom of Brigid and whatever Morphus is doing. What can easily be said about all of them is that they tend to do a grand total of nothing throughout both games, save for two kind of exceptions. Not sure how this video will turn out, but consider this my rounding out of the tour guide of Fodlan. Beginning with the land I think we know the most about, Almyra. Almyra is a large kingdom that is analogous to Persia from our world, home to many religions and languages and a history of horsemanship and I guess wyvernship, as well as a custom of combat and revelry in said combat. Looting, pillaging, and general chicanery, they take a lot of cues from Mongols rather than Persia in that way. But I doubt it meant to be a perfect one-to-one. As we can gather from the few people we see that are actually from Almyra, the nation doesn't appear to have a noble structure. If it did, then I doubt Claude would find it so strange in Fodlan. Despite that, we do know that they are ruled by a king who tends to have many wives and many princely sons that hold heavy sway over the politics and people. Instead, it seems Almyra has a military hierarchy that functions under the king, which leads into their custom of combat. The greater the glory, the greater the name, the greater the power. Like look at Nadir, the Undefeated, probably the most powerful and trusted vassal of the king. He is usually only ever subordinate to a direct royal like Claude or Shahid. Side tangent, the Almyrans love their nicknames. Whether it's Nadir the Undefeated or Claude the Master Tactician, they love giving themselves and those around them titles in relation to their deeds. The current king, whose name is unknown but it's probably Khalid I, seems to rule with a light touch. More so since Claude went and vanished, leaving him mopey and sleep-deprived. Enough for Nadir to just use his signature in hand to sign up a whole fleet to help out the Leicester Federation. Said fleet had to be warned not to ransack the countryside of Fargus, but hey, it's all in good fun. Besides, it's not like you'd find much in that frozen death trap of a country. Instead of strict succession by way of the eldest child, the throne of Almyra seems to be passed on via selection from among the king's children. Whoever the king appoints as their heir will become the next king. So it sucks to suck if you aren't Dad's favorite like Claude clearly is. Almyra does have its darker side, though. The frequent fighting leads to a lot of dead people and a lot of orphans like Cyril, who are then conscripted to fight as well. There also doesn't always appear to be a lot of planning to their violence. Almyra has enough soldiers to possibly punch through Fodlan's locket if it really wanted to, but its army is so poorly organized, poorly motivated, and it only seems to fight for fighting's sake and so they can party about it afterwards. Despite this, Almyra has a pretty impressive navy of merchant vessels, which can be called on to act in a military fashion if need be. Said ships appear to be more advanced than anything Fodlan has come up with, which could be a natural consequence of the largely insular Fodlan having no large bodies of water by which navies would be necessary, save for the ocean between Brigid and the Empire, but that was a recent acquisition for it anyway. Prejudice is also not uncommon, as any Golden Deer knows, since it's that prejudice that the half-Fodlander Claude experiences, which spurs his journey to Fodlan and then to challenge the status quo of the continent at large. A journey that appears to have some precedent, although not any official one. Nadir explains that he and the current king frequently snuck into Leicester under disguise just for the laughs. It's likely this was around the time the king met Claude's mother, Tiana, and she eventually ran away with him. I'm sure that will have no lasting consequences. It actually wasn't too hard for the king and Nadir to sneak into Fodlan, as the locket is designed to hold back armies and not a couple of dudes being bros gallivanting across the mountains. It also helps that the king and seemingly several other Almyrans from around the border speak the Fodlan language. This could just be natural cultural dissemination from before Fodlan's locket was erected, since that only happened a few generations ago. Or it could imply parts of Fodlan and Almyra were less divided than they are today. For example, Kupala, the home of Balthus's lineage, has a sort of mixed history with both Leicester and Almyra, implying a possible past. Still, in spite of their past grievances with Fodlan, should Claude get his way, then Almyra can and will come to the defense of Leicester. In Verdant Wind and Crimson Flower, he calls on their aid even if he is defeated in the latter. Over the course of the 5-year timeskip, he was setting up meetings and forging friendships between Holst and Nadir, as well as encouraging the Almyrans and Fodlan soldiers of the Locket to interact. These actions paid off in Verdant Wind when the Almyrans helped take Fort Mercius, before those who suck the life and joy from me blow it up, but it's worth the mention. In 3 hopes they have an even bigger, if still rather light, role in Golden Wildfire. Once the Alliance becomes the Federation and Shahid is defeated, Nadir is freed up to assist Claude by way of using Almyran resources for the war effort. Admittedly, the Almyrans take a back seat after a certain point from here, but considering what we were working with before, it's quite appreciated, especially since it's pivotal information in regards to one of our main lords. I could go on about Kupala, Balthus' home, but the most we know is that it's some kind of independent settlement in the mountains between Leicester and Almyra, with a history connected to the Apostle Chevalier. What few Fodlanders know about them seem to see them as a sort of mystical and mysterious place, but besides that there's nothing else to talk about. From there we move on, shifting clockwise to Morphus. So Morphus is a funny one. It is described as a utopia of magic, the city of illusion, which really paints a marvelous picture. However, we know pitiably little. In fact, we get one line about it in 3 houses, which I will now read for you. Morphus is the name of a metropolis of magic to the southeast of Fodlan, as well as the boundless desert that surrounds it. In the distant past, it was called the City of Illusion. Thanks to an intricate web of trading routes, rumors of its profound and mysterious magic continue to spread. Congrats. That's all they wrote. For all the intrigue that brief description grants us, it has been the only thing we've had from Morphus for the entire lifespan of these games. Not much to analyze, huh? I do sometimes wonder if Morphus has something to do with the Agarthans, but it's just too vague to speculate on anything. Of the countries we do know about, Brigid is right there with Almyra as the second country we know a lot about. An archipelago kingdom rather close to the Empire, but also near the mysterious Dagda. Caught between the two, Brigid has found itself on the wrong side of both. They have been strong-armed or invaded by both at least once, though historically they tend to side with Dagda, which appears to have more cultural similarities compared to Fodlan. And what culture does Brigid have? A pretty detailed one, actually. Brigid's people are raised to be both self-sufficient and multi-talented. Every farmer is trained to be as deadly as any warrior, and every warrior must know how to live off the land. A sense of practicality permeates their way of war and life. In Brigid, ownership of the land is not viewed the same, as it is viewed as belonging to every person of Brigid. This is likely a result of the faith of the Isles. The people of Brigid worship the spirits, who are said to have lifted the island from the sea and exists in all things and places. The royal family entreats the spirits with ceremonial dances, and they tell stories of humans blessed and filled with the spirits. All in all, what we get paints a very vibrant picture of the archipelagic nation and its people. However, there exists a caveat as always. Brigid suffers due to its neighbors. Living in Brigid means being dragged around by whichever power currently holds their leash. As mentioned before, Dagda held that leash for centuries, but after the Dagda and Brigid war against the Empire, Brigid lost badly. Its prince and heir was killed by Count Leopold surrendering his cringe von Bergleys, and Petra, said prince's daughter and the new heir, was taken as a political prisoner when the Empire vassalized Brigid. An odd bright spot, however, in the story of Houses and Hopes, is that the war Edelgard starts is exactly what Brigid needs to break out from the Empire's control. With the prior structure of the Empire breaking down and Edelgard's willingness to release Brigid, no matter what side Petra and by extension Brigid chooses to support, their freedom is assured. Then they can get back to starting wars of succession and over lovers. On one hand, that may seem like petty things to start wars over for a nation all about people sharing the land, but on the other hand, we still fight flame wars over whether the funny albino red lady was right. So, glass houses. Somewhere west of Brigid is the vast and enigmatic Dagda. Unlike Brigid, it is far more powerful and very interested in expanding its influence. Despite how Dagda is usually referred to as a whole, we are in the dark about whether it's a single unified nation or if it's more divided. Shamir makes reference to something she calls a mercenary state, which, based upon other dialogue, could imply that Dagda is far more decentralized, but its people share a common culture and sphere of influence, almost like ancient Greece, and that sphere could be far larger than we realize. Beneath Garrigmach, into the subterranean city of Abyss, there is a statue of the Dagdan god of fate. A huge robed figure with wings outstretched. How? Why? When? The answer to all these questions is unclear. Maybe it was claimed during the imperial invasion of Dagda and the church took it afterwards due to its heretical nature. Maybe Dagdan refugees left behind after one of the many wars built it so they could have a place to worship in peace. Maybe those who hit the Yoinky Splunky dropped it here to troll the church. Maybe some eons ago, the goddess Sothis herself went on a drunken binger and created a bunch of these statues of her OC, Dareth McFellclaw, and one wound up in Dagda and became worshipped. And then the one in Abyss was put there by Sothis out of embarrassment. Your guess is as good as mine because intelligent systems and Koei Tecmo, mostly that second one, care more about explaining for the 68th time why the church is bad. I'm not saying it's untrue, but please just explain one of the minor plot holes you've created. Here, I'll make it easy for you by giving you another explanation. Perhaps the ruins of Abyss are actually of a pre-Sothis Agarthan city that was destroyed and buried beneath Garreg Mach. And this statue was one of the Agarthan gods which is referenced as to have been destroyed by Sothis. The reason it is worshipped in Dagda could be that some Agarthans fled overseas and found Dagda. Whether they were the only people there or their culture was disseminated through the locals, Dagda now worships the gods of Agartha. This could explain Dagda's constant beef with Fodlan, why the statue is in Abyss, and why the statue apparently whispers, which I don't even know how to process. Is it true? Oh, most certainly not, but it's something. What was I talking about? Right. We know next to nothing about Dagda, and our one representative of the continent, Shamir, isn't much for talking. I guess we know at least one country-like faction exists there, which is more than I can say about Albanea. Albanea is referenced a grand total of once in dialogue, and it was offhandedly. From writings, we know it's sparsely populated, hard to farm, and home to a variety of rare plants and animals. Like Morphus, it's kind of untouched territory and leaves me unable to get too deep into it. Then there's whatever this place is. It doesn't even get to have a name. How unfair is that? It's even worse off than Albanea since no one even mentions it, and yet it's directly above Duscur and closer than Albanea is. Unless you want me to believe that Albanea is actually a giant horseshoe shape and this is part of it. So instead, I'm going to name it. This shall be Hearthlandia, and if anyone ever asks you to elaborate, don't. Moving slightly south of the territory now called Clyman, we speak of Duscur, the country that has suffered more than any other. A heavily decentralized region in which the people of Duscur lived in villages, each dedicated to a specific craft and likely to specific gods. Polytheistic, they had a god for every aspect of life, like any classic mythology Rick Riordan writes books about, and who gets dope songs in Epic the Musical. They even kind of incorporated Sothis into this, considering her the goddess of the people of Fodlan and therefore real, but just not relevant to those living in Duscur. Duscur seemed largely quiet and rural, without much interest in the outside world and content with their own lives. So, as you can imagine, other people made that a problem. Being so close to the Kingdom of Fargus, and especially the western part, which has a 90% population of terrible backstabbing scoundrels, made conflict between Duscur and its neighbor a regular part of life. Things would sway between getting better and getting worse until one day, King Lambert came along and tried to implement a number of reforms to improve relations. Unfortunately, there's this little thing called the Tragedy of Duscur that happened, which, based on the name, you can guess what kind of event it was. Lambert and an entourage of knights with his wife and son were visiting Duscur for peace talks, when they were ambushed and slaughtered. Dimitri, the king's son, was the only survivor. And despite Dimitri saying that the people he saw committing the act were not of Duscur, the kingdom sent in the military to summarily massacre everything in sight. Duscur was taken over, and a noble house called Clyman, which previously only controlled a single castle, was given the entire peninsula as their own. If any of this sounds fishy, it's because this whole thing was set up by the king's brother, the western nobles, a handful of bitter people of Duscur, and the king's wife Patricia, with obvious support from a certain dark organization that I made an entire video explaining why I don't like them. Needless to say, the people of Duscur were decimated, and countless were left dead in the wake of the event. Their home was conquered by an uncaring regime, and the only handful of people that thought they were innocent were not the ones making the decisions. On the bright side, Duscur is allowed its independence back in any Blue Lions ending, as this is explicitly one of Dimitri's aims once he becomes king. So they at least have a chance for a happy ending. Now we go to the last place to talk about, Srang. Duscur's had it rough, but living in Srang appears to be a consistently crappy experience. For starters, what is called Srang is only half of traditional Srang, as half the peninsula that was the region was conquered by the kingdom roughly 15 years ago. Said land was the more fertile and usable part of Srang, leaving the people of Srang with the frozen wasteland and random desert to call home. Naturally, they were not pleased with that arrangement, and so have been consistently raiding the borders of Fargus ever since. Mostly they're fended off by the Gautier family or House Fraldarius, but they rarely make much headway in the face of the overwhelming power of these two houses and the heroes' relics they possess. People in Srang and Fargus don't have a high opinion of each other, even by comparison to how most people in Fodlan see foreigners. Despite that, even the people of Fargus can respect the work of one Zoltan, a master artisan that designed weapons that last even into the modern day and are desired by everyone. Almost all people of Srang cannot speak the language of Fodlan, and there's rarely the chance to learn, so communication is a no-go from the start. But there is a tiny, ever so infinitesimally small chance. The old chief that governed most of the Srang tribes, Oleg, committed to a big raid against Fargus's border at one point and lost, leading to his death and the capture of his grandson, Leif. Leif would end up being spoken to by Margrave Gautier, who would in turn teach him how to speak the language and develop something of a relationship with him and his son, Sylvain. Naturally, Leif would take the first chance he could to flee, but even later on, when Leif leads his own raiding parties against Fargus, he has a level of respect for Sylvain and the Margrave. Kind of. So, perhaps, if the right people are still in charge, Srang and Fargus could bury the hatchet one day. It's a bit of a coin flip, but there's a chance. Well, there is nothing more to talk about in all the Huh? What? What do you mean I'm missing something? What could I have possibly... Oh... Right, let's talk about this real quick. The Ashen Wolves are the best house, and I will die on that hill. Coming from the underground city of Abyss, they live the life those that eat Waffle House at 3 a.m. wishes they had. A city underneath the holiest place on the continent, which is home to every kind of thug, rat, bum, and unwashed mass that you can hope to find. There is no government here, and people disappear regularly either by being dragged away by some group of criminals that live down here or just by losing their way in the labyrinth of ruins. The closest thing to order in the place is established by the Ashen Wolves and its leader, Yuri. Yuri leads the wolves, as well as a gang of thugs that tend to work in a somewhat morally gray area in order to sustain and protect the people of Abyss. The Ashen Wolves were first assembled by Elfric, a cardinal from the church who initially formed it with good intentions, until he went a little crazy. Long story short, Elfric went looking for a magic cup that could resurrect the dead, so he could bring Byleth's mom Citri back to life because he was an incel. To do so, he brought together 4 people with the crests of the 4 apostles who were tied to the cup. In Cindered Shadows, he almost succeeds, except for that the cup can't return the soul and instead turns him into a meatball monster. In actual canon, it appears he was outed long before it got that far, probably by Yuri, who is actually Rhea's eyes and ears in Abyss. In the end, Elfric was banished, and Yuri and the wolves went back to what they usually did: lurk around Abyss and generally cause chaos by existing. And yet they are still the least problematic out of all the houses, and if I could hand Fodlan over to Yuri, I would do it. He has humility, ability, loyalty to his people, and most importantly, he has an actual perspective about what it means to live life as a commoner in Fodlan. Does he probably have a few bodies buried in the floorboards? Sure, but let me remind you who the alternatives are. Dimitri, Edelgard, Rhea, and Claude. This isn't exactly the Board of Purity here. Blood is spilt wherever these folks go. And yet, for some reason, the church never bothers to utilize what is probably a very large and ingrained syndicate that Yuri has formulated over the years. When you're fighting a superior force like the Empire, you'd think bringing in some sneaky folks would be very good. I mean, just give Yuri an official title and he'd be the church's official hitman. Just call him an Inquisitor. It'll seem church-like enough. However, doomed as he and the Wolves are as DLC characters, and the fact that Koei Tecmo hates Rhea with greater fire than Martin Luther hates the Catholic Church, we never got a church route in Three Hopes, and therefore no chance for the Wolves to awaken to their full potential. These dreams of mine will have to remain locked in the corridors of fanfiction. Or until I get to reworking Silver Snow. You know, it's bound to happen. Crimson Flower is coming first, but as I've said, these will be long videos with a lot of editing to make them work. On that note, it's time to wrap up. As of now, the Hearth Guy's tour to Fodlan has drawn to a close. In the span of about a month, my channel went from barely pushing 300 subscribers and averaging a few hundred views to now over 1,700 and getting over 10,000 views in 24 hours with these videos. I don't know if the algorithm will keep favoring me, but I am eternally grateful that you all are. You helped me go from some nothing channel to actually forming a community around here. And yes, I do mean community, because I recognize a lot of you guys coming back to comment on every video, and you have no idea how much that means. But alas, Fodlan only has so much to talk about, so we must move on. If any of you have paid attention to my community posts, then you know what it is I'll be touring out for all of you next. There will be a short break in between as I start writing and working on those videos. I have a countdown I left on the back burner that I need to finish up, and I have to figure out the format for these videos. As always, thank you so much for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, and share the video around. All these things individually do so much, and together they start to add up in big ways. I have a Patreon and YouTube membership for those who feel like spending money on me, but it's just an offer. The fact I make money at all due to the views is astounding on its own, and you're already contributing to that by watching. Speaking of, enormous, massive shout out to my very first patron, Van West, a cowboy who came to the future and the very first thing they did was learn what Fire Emblem Three Houses was. Credit for that joke to my sister, though. It was the first thing out of her mouth when I told her, and she insisted that I credit her. So, as we all say goodbye to Fodlan and Fire Emblem for now, let us look forward to the future of this channel and this series. I am the Hearth Guy, and say it with me now, I will see you all next time, around the hearth.
Then two great titans came into existence. The Bionis and the Mechonis.
This is a weird episode of Power Rangers. Also, why does almost no one live here?